The Alberta Men's Survey was developed by over 50 men and 10 women concerned about men's well-being and the promotion of healthy, nonviolent relationships. On April 28, 2015, prior to launching the survey in the community, the survey leadership team convened for a full day of research training. This training was organized by the Faculty of Social Work, University of Calgary, in partnership with the Ethnocultural Council of Calgary, City of Edmonton Community Services, and the Alberta Father Involvement Initiative. 27 participants attended, including community members and organizations, agencies, funders, government representatives, academics, and students. The research training includes several modules, one of which is presented here. The purpose of this research training was to prepare the leadership team and research assistants to implement the Alberta Men's Survey and to also develop a community-friendly research teaching series that can be used by others. We would like to extend our appreciation to the Ethnocultural Council of Calgary and the United Way of Calgary and Area for making this video series possible.
My name is Robertson, and I'm a graduate student at the University of Calgary, and I will give you a brief crash course on survey design and methodology. A very brief one. So if you're interested in a more in-depth overview of the subject, Statistics Canada has a 400-page report free to download from the link below. You've got some light reading time on your hands. So I'll start with the very basics so I don't make any assumptions. What is a survey? Essentially, it is a form of questioning used to investigate the opinions and/or experiences of a specific group of people. This is true of all surveys, no matter how complex or simple they may be. When deciding to use a survey versus other research methods, there are advantages and disadvantages. This isn't a list of all of them, but this is some of the important things for you to consider. I would argue that the best situation to use a survey is when you're interested in directly obtaining the opinion of a specific group of people, because that's what surveys are used for, to get feedback. So the life cycle of most surveys can be broken down into 8 very basic steps. So first, you need to formulate a study objective. Ask yourself, why do I want to do this survey? What is it for? Then you can determine your sample size and your sampling methods. So who is the survey meant for, and who are you using it with? Then you can select your survey design and method, and there are almost hundreds of designs out there these days. You can formulate your survey questions, so it will really depend on what sort of research you're doing. Is it qualitative? Is it quantitative? Is it mixed methods? You can administer your survey, which you guys will learn about later on today, and then you can debrief all the way through research participants and just researchers in general. You can do data analysis, and then you can document, finalize, or publish and disseminate your findings. So I only have time to go briefly through the first 5 steps. So the first one, formulating your research objective. You really have to ask yourself, what do you want to achieve with your survey? Who is this for? Who are your funders? What do you want to do with the results? It seems like a really kind of easy step, but this is something you want to spend a lot of time on because it will save you a lot of work down the road, especially when you select your survey design. You need a clear objective in mind. Once you have that, you can figure out your population and your sample. So sampling is a term that simply refers to the process of selecting a subset of units from a greater population in order to draw inferences about the larger population. So for example, the people here today are a subset of all the different organizations that are involved. When you do this, you ideally want access to a sampling frame. So ideally, this is a complete list of all the known individuals in your population which you can sample from. In the case of a census, for example, the federal government often has access to almost every Canadian in Canada in terms of doing research. Most researchers don't have that luxury, and we work from much more limited sampling frames. So a target population, for example, may be a specific neighborhood in Calgary. So for you, those of you who are not familiar with the terms population sample, population formally means a large group of individuals, organisms, or units from which you can draw samples. So the city of Calgary or an ant colony are both good examples. And then a sample is simply a portion or a subset of units taken from the larger population. So Calgarians aged 18 to 25 or 9 ants from the colony represents a sample. So once you've done that, you have to decide how big they should be. And this is a really tricky thing because it will impact what sort of research are you doing. Is it qualitative, is it quantitative, it's mixed methods. How big they should be depends on your data and also your funds and your time and a lot of other factors. There's something in survey research called representativeness, or having a representative sample. This is one of the trickiest things to do in survey research because in order to verify that you have a representative sample, you need to use a lot of statistics. And this is only often done with quantitative or mixed method research, and there's a lot that goes into it. So for our purposes, all that it means is the sample that you take is so representative of the larger population, you can generalize your results to the rest of the population you have not sampled. A good example of this is federal vote projection polls. So this is a poll for the upcoming election, for example. And obviously, the authors of this did not go out and sample every single Canadian to see who they might vote for. This is a very informed guess, basically. So a word on that is the men's survey, for example, is a needs assessment. It is a mixed method, largely qualitative survey, and you can't necessarily use a lot of statistics with it. That doesn't mean that it's not important or that it shouldn't be done. Like Michael and a couple people mentioned before, academia is very strict and it's very structured, obviously, and there's a lot of, kind of higher level authority when it comes to doing research, but I would argue that some of the best community-based surveys are the most useful, even if they're not, valid or they don't have internal or external validity. So if you do find yourself in a situation where you do have to do a bunch of statistics or make sure that your sample is representative for various purposes, I would argue you want to hire a statistician to do it for you, or an informed researcher can go online and find many free tools to do this. For example, the sample size calculator on SurveyMonkey is a good example. So it'll give you a rough estimate of what you should be going for, if that's what you're going for. So the second step, if you're not tired by this point, is to figure out how you're going to sample your population and your specific sample. So most surveys use cross-sectional data, which means that they sample a single population at a single point in time. So for example, the men's survey is an example of that if you do it once. However, if you keep doing it or you do it consistently, it would be an example of longitudinal sampling, which is data that is collected from a specific population over a long period of time. This sort of sampling has a lot of benefits over just cross-sectional. However, it's very time-consuming and it takes a lot of money, but you can get some really, really interesting data. So just so you're aware, there are two main types of sampling used in survey research: probability or random sampling and non-probability or non-random sampling. The men's survey uses non-probability sampling because it's very selective. It's very specific. So the only thing you really need to know about this is probability sampling is often used in statistical quantitative-based surveys because it's used as kind of a golden standard for a lot of experiments. Non-probability sampling is a lot more flexible and is often used in qualitative and more mixed methods. And both have their pros and cons, as you can see. So it really depends on your time, who you're doing it for, and especially your population, because random sampling with certain populations is not ethical and it is not advised because you can't just randomly pick and choose. So these are some things to consider. Are there any language barriers? How much money and time do you have? What data is already available on your sample? Do you need to resample people? There's a lot of things to consider. So step 3 is selecting a survey design, and as these examples show, there's a lot of different ways to do it. You can do it electronically, in person, over the phone, by questionnaire. There's a lot of different methods out there. For your purposes, it's good to know that any sort of survey design is usually in one of 2 categories. It's either a questionnaire, it's paper-based, or it's an interview-based one, which is usually in person or conducted vocally. So some considerations, again, time, money, what you want to do with your data. Is your survey format readily accessible to all your participants? This is something we've really talked about a lot with the men's survey, because we have men from all different backgrounds, different linguistic kind of communities, reasonable length, literacy, what sort of questions, the wording. Is your survey culturally relevant? This is a lot of stuff to consider, and again, you've got to spend a lot of time on each step. For example, and finally question 50, do you ever feel like killing someone? You don't want to have your survey to be too long, just in the pursuit of data. So finally, if you get to this step, then you can actually formulate your survey questions. And again, 2 broad categories. You have unstructured, open-ended questions, or structured and closed-ended questions. So unstructured, for example, is you let the participant just say their opinion or really answer in any which way that they would prefer, and there's usually not a limit. For structured, there's many different ways, closed-ended questions, so yes, no. Likert scales, for example, where they have a scaled or ranked answer, there's a lot of different options for both formats. Again, you have to ask yourself, who is your population? What are their needs? What are your needs? What are your resources? This will shape it. And finally, you can get to the point where you administer your survey. And this is where you have to be very careful with something called bias. Bias is the idea that you intentionally influence the outcome of your research. All surveys, all forms of research, no matter how good they are biased in some degree. Academic, non-academic, community-based, there's all bias. It's all about locating it. What you want to try and avoid is making it more biased than you need. So you don't want to encourage one outcome or answer over the others, because then you're just tampering with your data. Some tips to avoid that is to, clarify any concerns during administration. If you have a script, stick to it with everyone. Don't change your tone. Don't try and lead anyone. And yeah, don't try and answer things for anyone else.